What would you do if you discovered that the pursuit of freedom, something most of us crave and value above all else, can actually lead us into a maze of self-destruction and suffering? We think of freedom as the absence of constraints, the ability to do as we please, to follow our deepest impulses without guilt or fear. It's the idea of being the architects of our own destinies, free from the chains of society, conventional morality, and even the limitations imposed by our own nature. But what if this absolute freedom, pursued without discernment, is a veil for a far more insidious kind of slavery? What if, in trying to free ourselves from all constraints, we find ourselves trapped in a web of our own making, a web of unforeseen consequences and self-consuming desires? This is not an exploration of political or social freedom, though these concepts may tangentially intersect. We are delving into a much more primordial and existential form of freedom, one that was analyzed, practiced, and, for some, perverted by one of history's most controversial and enigmatic figures, Aleister Crowley. Known for his esoteric rituals, his life philosophy, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," and his reputation as the wickedest man in the world, Crowley was not just a practitioner of the occult. He was a theorist who sought to unlock the deepest secrets of human existence and consciousness. His vision of freedom went far beyond simple autonomy. He proposed a path of radical self-discovery, where true liberation would come from embracing and understanding all aspects of oneself, including those that society considers dark, undesirable, or sinful. The question that guides us is, how can this quest for total freedom, stripped of any external or internal control, manifest in a dark side? And what lessons can we draw from this radical exploration? The fascination with Aleister Crowley lies not only in his eccentric practices, but in his attempt to create a philosophical and spiritual system that promised a path to radical self-transformation and true freedom. Born Edward Alexander Crowley in 1875, he grew up in a deeply religious home, which, ironically, seems to have fostered a rebellion against the rigid moral and religious norms of his time. This initial rebellion developed into an obsessive search for occult knowledge and a deeper understanding of reality, which he believed lay hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. Crowley saw social, religious, and moral structures as shackles that prevented the individual from reaching their full potential. For him, true freedom was found not in conformity, but in exploring all impulses and desires, overcoming all taboos, and embracing all that life has to offer, without judgment or restriction. His intellectual formation and life experiences led him to believe that humanity was asleep, trapped in an illusion of reality that prevented it from seeing and experiencing the universe in its entirety. He saw himself as a prophet, a modern-day messiah, destined to reveal a new path to enlightenment and freedom, a path he called Thelema. The philosophy of Thelema, encapsulated in his famous maxim, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," suggests that each individual has a true will, a unique and innate purpose, and that the pursuit of this will is the path to self-realization and freedom. However, what "thou wilt" in this context is crucial and often misunderstood. For Crowley, it was not an impulsive or hedonistic desire, but a deep spiritual calling that required self-knowledge, discipline, and an understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. He believed that by understanding and acting according to one's true will, one aligns with cosmic forces, achieving a form of freedom that transcends worldly limitations. This search for true will, however, led him down paths that many considered dangerous and immoral. He delved into magical practices, rituals, and an open exploration of sexuality and substances that were considered taboo. The core of Aleister Crowley's philosophy and his particular vision of freedom lies in a few central concepts, the most prominent being the true will. This should not be confused with the ephemeral desires or selfish desires that dominate most people. For Crowley, the true will is an individual's intrinsic purpose, their cosmic function, the unique path they must follow towards self-transformation and fulfillment. He believed that by discovering and acting upon this will, the individual frees themselves from the limitations imposed by society, conventional morality, and even their own weaknesses and fears. The famous maxim, "Do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law," which serves as the fundamental tenet of his religion, Thelema, is often misinterpreted as an invitation to anarchy or unbridled hedonism. However, Crowley insisted that willing here refers to the discovery and execution of the true will, a process requiring profound self-knowledge, rigorous discipline, and an understanding of the interconnectedness of the universe. He argued that most people live lives of servitude, following desires imposed by others or driven by fears and insecurities. True freedom, for him, was the ability to live in harmony with one's will, undistracted by distractions or social pressure. To achieve this will, Crowley proposed the use of magical methods and rituals, which he saw as tools for expanding consciousness, overcoming the limitations of the ego, and connecting with higher forces or the collective unconscious. He believed that magic, when practiced correctly, was not superstition, but a science and an art of inducing changes in consciousness in accordance with the will. This ranged from meditation and yoga practices to more complex and controversial rituals, which often involved the exploration of sexuality, the use of psychotropic substances, and the transgression of social and moral taboos. The pursuit of absolute freedom, as proposed by Crowley, has profound implications that extend far beyond the individual and the esoteric realm. If we consider the maxim, "Do what thou wilt," and interpret it in the broader sense of seeking the fulfillment of all desires and the absence of restrictions, we can see how this can affect social structure. In a society where each individual relentlessly pursues their own satisfaction without considering the consequences for others, the social contract, which is based on certain mutual concessions and limitations for the common good, would collapse. The laws, norms, and codes of conduct that regulate human interaction would be seen as obstacles to individual freedom, leading to potential chaos. On the other hand, if we understand Crowley's true will, not as unbridled selfishness, but as the discovery of a higher purpose, the implications may be different. An individual who has discovered their true will and is living it fully can, in theory, be making a unique and valuable contribution to the world. Consider an artist who feels the uncontrollable urge to create, a scientist driven by insatiable curiosity, or a philanthropist dedicated to a cause. These individuals, in their quest, may appear free from worldly concerns, but their freedom is intrinsically linked to their calling, and often to the benefit of others. However, the dark side emerges when this quest for freedom becomes a pretext to justify actions that harm others, or when the pursuit of personal satisfaction ignores the need for responsibility. Society, in its quest for order and peaceful coexistence, naturally imposes limits on individual freedom. The question is where to draw the line. Crowley's philosophy, by challenging most of these limitations, forces us to question the nature of freedom itself and the price we are willing to pay for it. If freedom is the absence of constraints, then In its most extreme form, it could lead to the freedom to harm, the freedom to exploit, the freedom from responsibility. This is the fundamental tension: individual freedom versus social order and collective well-being. One of the most controversial aspects of Crowley's philosophy, which fuels the dark side of his vision of freedom, is the various interpretations and applications of his teachings, which often lead to dangerous misunderstandings. The main myth is that "do what thou wilt" means doing whatever one pleases, without any ethical or moral consideration. This simplistic interpretation ignores Crowley's emphasis on true will, which he saw as a spiritual path requiring self-knowledge, discipline, and an understanding of universal laws. He did not advocate unrestrained hedonism, but rather the fulfillment of a higher purpose, which can often be difficult and require sacrifice. Another area of controversy revolves around his magical practices, which included complex rituals, invocations of entities, and, notoriously, the use of psychotropic substances and the exploration of sexuality in ways considered taboo by society. Crowley saw these practices as tools for expanding consciousness and breaking down psychological and social barriers that prevented the individual from achieving their true will. However, what he considered a legitimate pursuit of knowledge and self-transformation, many saw as perversion, immorality, and even a path to insanity or evil. The idea that freedom can be found in the transgression of all social and moral norms raises serious questions. Where does individual liberty end and harm to others begin? The pursuit of absolute personal freedom, if detached from responsibility and empathy, can easily degenerate into destructive selfishness. Crowley, in his quest for radical freedom, seemed less concerned with social conventions than with the radical authenticity of the individual. This approach, while potentially liberating for some, can be seen by others as irresponsible and dangerous, opening the door to abuse and the justification of harmful behavior under the guise of true will. The line between spiritual self-discovery and self-destruction is a fine one, and Crowley's philosophy, with its emphasis on transgression and the exploration of the dark side of the human psyche, flirts dangerously with that line. At the end of this immersion in Aleister Crowley's teachings on freedom, we are left with more questions than answers, and that is, perhaps, the ultimate goal. His radical vision of "do what thou wilt" forces us to confront the very nature of freedom. Is it the total absence of constraints, a state of personal anarchy where every impulse is satisfied? Or does it reside in a deeper form of self-knowledge and alignment with a higher purpose, even if that purpose requires discipline and sacrifice? The dark side we glimpse in his philosophy is not necessarily evil itself, but the potentially destructive consequences of a pursuit of freedom that ignores responsibility, empathy, and the interconnectedness of all beings. The promise of absolute unfettered freedom can be seductive, but also dangerously deceptive. It can lead us to lose ourselves in our own desires, justify harmful actions, and isolate ourselves from a community that, despite its imperfections, offers us structure and support. The lesson we can draw from Crowley is not to embrace his more extreme or controversial practices, but rather the importance of questioning the bindings we so unthinkingly accept. What are the social conventions, inherited beliefs, and internalized fears that prevent us from living a more authentic and meaningful life? And crucially, how do we pursue this authenticity responsibly in a way that honors our own true will without harming the freedom and well-being of others? The journey to freedom, whether we understand it as radical self-discovery or as a path of responsibility and purpose, is an ongoing exploration. Crowley's work serves as a mirror, reflecting the dangers of a path to freedom pursued without wisdom and without due consideration for the delicate balance between the self and the world around us. It is an invitation to reflect on the true meaning of being free in an interconnected world. Crowley's fundamental purpose, beyond mere transgression, was to catalyze a revolution in human consciousness, dismantling the psychological defenses that keep us trapped in a limited view of reality. He believed that conventional morality, by imposing a rigid set of rules and judgments, not only stifled individual expression but also prevented us from confronting and integrating the shadow parts of our own psyches. These parts, often suppressed and projected onto others, are actually sources of power and knowledge when understood and accepted. Thus, the search for freedom, in the Crowleyan sense, entailed a courageous delve into the depths of the unconscious, accepting the totality of the self, including its primal instincts, its deepest fears, and its repressed desires. Transgression in this context was not an end in itself, but a means to break the shackles self-imposed by civilization and education, an act of radical self-liberation. He saw the common man as a divided creature, at war with himself, incapable of achieving unity and wholeness. True magic, for him, was the process of inner reunification, of integrating the scattered aspects of the personality, including those condemned by society. In this way, the freedom achieved was not the freedom to do anything, but the freedom to be fully who one is, without the burden of others' judgment or self-repression. This inner revolution, according to Crowley, was the only path to true emancipation, a return to our original nature, stripped of the layers of social artificiality. Furthermore, Crowley's approach to freedom demanded a radical rethinking of the notion of good and evil. He argued that these concepts are merely social constructs, tools of control that limit human experience and obscure the true nature of the universe. In his view, what society considers evil is often simply a natural energy or impulse that, when channeled correctly, can lead to self-transformation and growth. Suppressing these energies, rather than eliminating them, only made them more powerful and destructive, manifesting in indirect and insidious ways. By embracing and working with these dark impulses under the guidance of their true will, the individual could, paradoxically, achieve a state of greater balance and harmony. This implied immense courage to confront that which frightens or shames us, and a discerning capacity to differentiate between the destructive impulse and the impulse that propels us toward our unique fulfillment. Freedom, therefore, was not the absence of internal conflict, but the ability to navigate that conflict with awareness and purpose, transforming negative energy into creative force. This perspective directly challenges the traditional moral dichotomy, proposing a path where acceptance of the whole self, including its darkest aspects, is the key to genuine freedom and authentic personal power. Therefore, the practical implication of Crowley's philosophy for the individual quest for freedom lies in the profound responsibility each person must assume for their own journey. By rejecting imposed morality and embracing the true will, the individual becomes the sole arbiter of their actions. This is both a privilege and a colossal burden. Total freedom, devoid of external guidance or a pre-established moral code, demands an extraordinary level of self-awareness and integrity. The ability to discern between a fleeting desire and the true will is crucial. An individual who confuses impulsive gratification with the fulfillment of purpose can quickly descend into chaos and self-destruction, believing they are acting in accordance with freedom, but in fact, being a slave to their own whims. Discipline, far from being a restriction on freedom, becomes the essential tool for navigating the complexities of the true will. It is through discipline that one can examine, understand, and ultimately integrate the darker aspects of the psyche, transforming its destructive potential into creative and directed force. True freedom, in this sense, is not a state of absence of rules, but a state of self-mastery, a conscious control over impulses and desires, allowing the true will to flourish without being stifled by external influences or internal disorder. Thus, absolute freedom, as envisioned by some interpreters of Crowley, can become a trap when disconnected from a higher purpose and responsibility. The idea that transgressing all social and moral norms leads to liberation is a dangerous fallacy. The dark side lies not in the norms themselves, but in the destructive energy that can be unleashed when freedom is exercised without discernment and without regard for the consequences. Society, at its core, is a covenant of coexistence, where certain restrictions are necessary to ensure the safety and well-being of all. The pursuit of individual freedom that ignores this covenant can lead to social disintegration and oppression, for in a vacuum of rules, the strongest or most unscrupulous tend to dominate. Crowley, despite his radical teachings, frequently emphasized the importance of the true will as a guide, something that, when deeply understood, aligns the individual with universal laws, not arbitrary human ones. The central issue, therefore, is not the absence of laws, but the alignment of actions with the principles that govern harmony and evolution, both individual and collective. True freedom, far from being a license for chaos, is the ability to act in accordance with one's essential nature, without disrupting the natural order of things. A crucial and often overlooked facet of Crowley's quest for freedom lies in his redefinition of the very notion of strength and weakness. Traditionally, strength is associated with virtue, self-control, and the ability to master impulses. Weakness, on the other hand, is seen as submission, indulgence, and moral failure. Crowley, however, reverses this perspective by arguing that rigid adherence to an external moral code, the repression of natural desires, and the fear of sin are, in fact, manifestations of weakness. They are signs that the individual is imprisoned by imposed beliefs and fears, unable to assert their own will and authentic nature. True strength, for him, lies in the courage to explore all aspects of existence, including those deemed repulsive by society, and to integrate them into a unified whole. This integration does not imply acting indiscriminately, but rather understanding the origin and function of these dark energies, transforming them into tools for self-knowledge and the manifestation of the true will. Consider, for example, the energy of anger. Conventional morality dictates that anger is destructive and should be avoided at all costs. Crowley, however, saw anger as a powerful driving force that, if understood and directed by true will, can propel an individual to overcome insurmountable obstacles or fight for a just cause with unshakable conviction. Ignoring or repressing this energy, he argued, only made it more volatile and prone to uncontrollable outbursts in moments of greatest vulnerability. Thus, the freedom he preached was not liberation from emotion, but mastery over it. A mastery that can only be achieved through a courageous and non-judgmental exploration of all facets of the human psyche. At a deeper level, Crowley's proposal challenges the very foundation of our perception of reality, and consequently, our limitations. He argued that society conditions us to perceive the world in a very narrow way, filtered by conventions, expectations, and a binary morality of right and wrong. This filtering, while offering a sense of security and predictability, prevents us from accessing the fullness of human experience and potential. The search for freedom, in his view, is a process of deconstructing these artificial perceptions, a delving into the fluid and multifaceted nature of existence. This involves actively questioning what we accept as absolute truth and being open to experiencing alternative realities, even if they challenge our pre-existing notions of order and sanity. Consider the practice of meditation in altered states of consciousness, which Crowley explored extensively. He saw it not as an escape from reality, but as a means of accessing deeper layers of it, where the laws of causality and ordinary perception can dissolve, revealing hidden connections and truths. This exploration of the collective unconscious and inner worlds, far from being mere escapism, was for him the path to true self-awareness and, therefore, to freedom. The freedom to perceive the universe in all its complexity, without the distorting lenses of imposed limitations. The ability to transcend consensual reality, not to alienate oneself from it, but to understand it from an expanded perspective, is the essence of this Crowleyan freedom, a mastery over one's own perception that frees one from the constraints of ordinary reality. Additionally, Crowley's philosophy introduces a dimension of cosmic responsibility inherent in the pursuit of individual freedom. By postulating that each individual possesses a unique true will, he implied that this will is not a personal whim, but an essential contribution to the balance and evolution of the universe. Freedom, therefore, is not merely the right to express oneself without restriction, but the duty to manifest this will effectively and in alignment with the greater laws of existence. This perspective elevates the pursuit of freedom from an act of self-gratification to a spiritual commitment of cosmic proportions. For example, an individual whose true will is expressed through art may not immediately perceive the impact of their creations. However, for Crowley, the authentic expression of this will, even if it seems controversial or transgressive by conventional standards, has a role to play in the universal tapestry. Ignoring or suppressing this will, or replacing it with societally imposed desires, would be not only a personal limitation but also a failure to fulfill a cosmic duty. Freedom, in this context, is the ability to discern and fulfill one's role in the grand scheme of things, a responsibility that demands profound self-knowledge and constant attunement to the forces that govern existence. The pursuit of freedom thus becomes a pilgrimage to fulfill one's destiny, a task that, though solitary in essence, is intrinsically linked to the fabric of reality. Furthermore, Crowley's exploration of freedom touches on a sensitive point: the intersection between individual will and collective will, and how the exercise of the former can impact the latter. He proposed that as each individual achieves mastery of their own true will, collective harmony would emerge naturally, without the need for external coercion. This concept, though idealized, suggests that society, rather than a system of constraints, could be an ecosystem of authentic individuals, each contributing their own unique energy. Imagine a grand concert where each musician masters their instrument and plays according to the score, the composer's will. The result is a harmonious symphony. Crowley extrapolated this idea to social life, suggesting that each individual's true will would be their own score for life. However, the dark side emerges when an individual's interpretation of true will comes into direct and destructive conflict with the true will or well-being of others. If the freedom of one manifests as the oppression of many, the line between personal fulfillment and tyranny blurs. Crowley saw this dynamic as a test of discernment, The true will, at its core, would be in harmony with universal laws, not in conflict with the natural flow of existence. Freedom, therefore, is not the unrestricted right to do anything, but the ability to act in alignment with this greater order, even if it means defying the human norms that distort it. The question remains, how to discern this cosmic order in a world of conflicting desires and subjective interpretations. The essence of freedom propagated by Crowley, when taken to its extreme, manifests itself not as the absence of restrictions, but as the internalization of a new kind of discipline, the discipline of will. This discipline, however, does not conform to external norms of morality or social etiquette, but rather to an internal imperative, a law that the individual discovers within themselves. The dark side emerges when this internalization becomes distorted, transforming into a fanaticism for will itself, where flexibility and adaptability are lost. Imagine a sculptor who, obsessed with the initial vision of the stone, insists on extracting from it a specific form, even though the rock in its very nature calls for a different shape. This rigidity, this refusal to dialogue with matter, or in the human case with the circumstances and needs of others, is a perversion of freedom. Instead of being an instrument for self-realization, will becomes a self-imposed tyranny, a cycle of obsession that isolates the individual and blinds them to other possibilities. The freedom to do what one wants becomes the slavery of an inflexible desire, a distorted echo of the original maxim, which, in its conception, preached discovery and harmony, not blind obstinacy. The individual, in this state, mistakes stubbornness for strength and rigidity for purpose, losing the subtlety necessary to navigate life's complexities. Furthermore, the propagation of the idea of limitless freedom, when unrelated to deep ethical scrutiny and an understanding of the interconnectedness of all beings, can inadvertently legitimize exploitation and abuse. Crowley, in his quest to transcend convention, frequently utilized rituals and practices involving energies that, in the wrong hands, or without proper preparation and intention, could be destructive. The dark side is not inherent in these energies, but in their irresponsible application. Consider a doctor who discovers a powerful poison and instead of using it for controlled therapeutic purposes, employs it indiscriminately, causing harm. Similarly, psychic energy or willpower, when unleashed without the restraint of responsibility and respect for the autonomy of others, can become tools of manipulation and control. In this scenario, one individual's freedom expands at the expense of another's, creating an unbalanced and harmful power dynamic. The maxim, "do what thou wilt," can, if misinterpreted, become a shield to justify exacerbated selfishness, where personal desire overrides any consideration for the integrity or well-being of others, configuring a severe distortion of the original concept of personal fulfillment. Furthermore, the very idea that liberation lies in transgressing taboos, when taken to its extreme, can lead to a vicious cycle of seeking ever greater shocks and novelty, a kind of addiction to the scandalous. What was considered transgressive yesterday becomes banal today. Thus, to maintain a sense of freedom and rebellion, the individual may feel the need to push the limits ever further, seeking extreme sensations. This escalation in search of the forbidden can distract from the true search for purpose and self-knowledge, transforming it into a form of self-destructive entertainment. The dark side here is the loss of meaning and superficiality of the spiritual journey. Instead of a deep exploration of true will, it becomes a continuous performance, a relentless pursuit of excitement that ultimately empties the very idea of freedom. Genuine freedom, in this context, is not the ability to shock, but the ability to live authentically in harmony with one's being, a state that transcends the need for external validation through constant transgression. Furthermore, the suppression of dark aspects of the psyche, something Crowley aimed to demystify, can paradoxically create a dark side in the very quest for freedom. By attempting to eradicate or deny certain parts of oneself that are considered undesirable, the individual does not eliminate them, but rather pushes them into the subconscious. There, these repressed energies can grow in power and influence, manifesting in unexpected and often self-destructive ways, such as chronic anxiety, addictions, or compulsive behaviors. Crowley advocated integration, not eradication. Freedom, in his deepest vision, comes from the acceptance and understanding of all parts of the self. The dark side that emerges here is the illusion of freedom created by denial. A person may feel free from certain negative impulses because they repress them, but in reality, they are becoming a slave to their own fragmented psyche. True liberation, therefore, lies in confronting these repressed aspects with courage and awareness, integrating them in ways that make them less powerful and more constructive, rather than creating a hidden, dark side that undermines sanity and autonomy. Finally, it is crucial to consider the social dimension and the public interpretation of Crowley's ideas, which often distort the pursuit of freedom into something purely nihilistic or destructive. When the maxim, "do what thou wilt," is removed from its philosophical and spiritual context, it can easily be co-opted by those seeking to justify selfish, irresponsible, or even criminal behavior. The dark side of freedom, in this sense, manifests itself in the way the very ideas of liberation can be instrumentalized for evil, creating a stigma around any genuine search for self-discovery. This widespread public perception, fueled by the media and sensationalism, often ignores the complexity and depth of Crowley's teachings, reducing them to a mere invitation to chaos. True freedom, as he conceived it, requires a discipline and self-knowledge that are diametrically opposed to nihilism. The challenge, therefore, is for the individual seeking this freedom, not only to internalize their principles, but also to navigate a world that often distorts them, maintaining the integrity of their journey amid misunderstanding and judgment, remembering that the quest for self-liberation must never eclipse responsibility to the collective. As we navigate the intricacies of this complex exploration, where the promise of unlimited freedom intertwines with its potential abysses, we begin to glimpse a landscape where conventional notions of autonomy and restriction are radically challenged. The echo of the famous maxim, once whispered in search of liberation, now resonates with unexpected depth, inviting us to ponder the true nature of desire and purpose. As the multiple facets of this radical quest for individuality unfold before us, we realize that the path to true emancipation is not a territory free of difficult choices, nor a road paved with immediate gratification. Rather, it reveals itself as a landscape where self-discovery is inseparable from profound responsibility, where inner strength lies not in denial, but in the courageous integration of all the energies that make up the being. Reflecting on this journey thus far, the picture that emerges is not one of a simple rebellion against convention, but of an intricate dance between individual impulse and the deeper laws that govern existence. The contours of what was once thought to be the essence of freedom begin to dissolve, giving way to a more nuanced understanding, where the absence of external shackles can, ironically, mask more insidious forms of servitude, slavery to unexamined impulses, misunderstood desires, or a stubbornness that mistakes rigidity for purpose. This point of convergence invites us to look beyond the surface of actions, to the motivations and consequences that shape not only individual destiny, but also the interconnected web of reality. As we approach the final reflection, the landscape thickens, signaling that full understanding requires an even deeper dive into the practical and philosophical implications that emanate from this radical exploration, a journey through. Aleister Crowley's thought on freedom reveals that the quest for total emancipation, stripped of any form, is less an act of liberation and more a polished mirror reflecting the intrinsic complexity of existence itself. The echoing maxim, "Do what thou wilt," is not an invitation to unbridled anarchy, but a profound call to uncover the true will, a purpose that, when understood and lived with integrity, transcends the mere whims of the ego. The dark side of this radical freedom lies not in transgression itself, but in the possibility that, in seeking to free ourselves from all external constraints, we become slaves to our own ignorance, unexamined desires, or a rigidity that is mistaken for conviction. True strength, as Crowley suggests, is not the absence of shadow, but the courage to embrace it, to integrate it, transforming its destructive potential into a foundation for self-awareness and fulfillment. It is in accepting the totality of being, with its lights and shadows, that the key to unlocking the true secrets of autonomy lies. Therefore, the freedom that emerges from this profound reflection is not a state of lawlessness, but the mastery of an inner law, an alignment with the cosmic forces that govern universal harmony. The search for true will, far from being an act of isolated selfishness, is a cosmic commitment, a duty to express our unique essence for the benefit of the whole. The danger lies in confusing the freedom to act with the freedom to harm, in allowing personal desire to eclipse the fundamental interconnection that unites all things. The dark side reminds us that the quest for individual emancipation must always be tempered by responsibility, empathy, and profound discernment, ensuring that our quest for flight does not lead us to overthrow those who walk beside us. True mastery is not empty transgression, but conscious integration, the ability to dance with our own shadows without falling into their abysses. The practice of uncovering one's true will, of discerning between transient impulse and eternal purpose, is an invitation to courage and self-awareness. It is not about rejecting social conventions per se, but about questioning them wisely, seeking an alignment that honors both individuality and collectivity. Freedom, in its highest expression, is the act of being fully who one is, with all the complexity and nuance that this implies, in harmony with the universe. Thus, the journey that begins with curiosity about the promises of radical freedom culminates in an invitation to responsibility, self-knowledge, and the conscious integration of all facets of human experience. The true practice now begins, that of living this understanding, day after day, in every choice and in every moment, navigating the sometimes turbulent waters of existence with the wisdom of one who seeks, not the absence of restrictions, but the fullness of being.